What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another video. This one is for my Star Wars fans. This is something that people have been asking to get my feedback on, asked to get my opinions on. So, you know, I'm going to just read through the article and I'm just going to give you a rundown pretty much of what I have to say. But I'm going to start out by saying this. There isn't anything that you're going to say that, you know, that I don't agree with or what have you regarding the sequel trilogy. You know, I've made it very well known that I like the trilogy more than I dislike it. I think there's a lot to love about it, but I also think there's also just equally as much to, you know, dislike about it. And at the end of the day, you know, to those that say it's going to be decanonized, I think you're going to be waiting a while. I think this trilogy is never going to be decanonized, and, you know, the reason I say that is because the kids who grow up with these movies, you know, they're not going to know anything different. This is their Star Wars, this is their introduction, and who am I to, you know, who are we to take that away from them? But it is, you know, for us fans that have been here either from the prequel era, the original trilogy era, from the expanded universe era, whatever era that you are from, I think there is no denying that the lack of plan for this trilogy was its letdown. Now, don't get me wrong, there are instances where just because you have a plan doesn't mean it's going to work, or doesn't mean that it's going to land well just because you know where you're going. You know, a good example of that could be just anything, really. You know, anything that you have a solid plan for, just because you have a plan and you know where you're going, it doesn't always mean that it's going to work, and it doesn't always mean that it's going to be a good thing. You know, there are negatives to that as well, but I think at least when you have a plan, you have a rough outline story-wise, and even if the general consensus is people don't like it, or, you know, it sucks, at least the story is consistent. And that is a big flaw within the sequel trilogy, that there is just no consistency. There needs to be some ebb and flow in terms of the movies. It feels like each movie on its own is individually fantastic. As cohesively as a unit, they just don't work for me. They're not like that. They work as their own thing, but cohesively as a trilogy, not so much. But let's get into the article. Let's read. Let's see what it has to say. And this comes from Collider. J.J. Abrams reflects on Star Wars and when it's critical to have a plan. And the subtitle there just says, I do think that there's nothing more important than knowing where you're going. So instantly we can kind of get a bit of, you know, right, he even gets it as well. So, J.J. Abrams was never supposed to direct more than one film in the Star Wars franchise. This is true. He was literally brought on for The Force Awakens, and, you know, hence the scene at the end of The Force Awakens when Rey is handing off the new, you know, the lightsaber to Luke. It is quite literally a metaphorical way of saying to the second person in, right, here's the baton, you take it now. When he was first approached about tackling Episode 7, he turned it down. It took some... Oh, sorry, my mistake. Episode 9, he turned it down. Was it Episode 8? He turned it down. It took some convincing on the new Lucasfilm head Kathleen Kennedy's part to get Abrams to agree to sign on. And in doing so, Abrams said at the same time he was excited about the idea of creating a foundation from the ground up, from which other stories might grow. Indeed, The Force Awakens had the unenviable task of introducing brand new characters that fans would want to follow while also servicing fans' desires to see old favourites back on the screen. And BTW, I know that says 7, I was reading a different part. Abrams, co-writing the script with Lawrence Kasdan after Michael Arndt wrote the initial drafts, pulled it off, not only providing a satisfying conclusion to the Han Solo arc, but also making the world fall in love with Rey, Finn, Poe, BB-8, etc. As Abrams was working on The Force Awakens, Lucasfilm wanted to get the next 2 films in the sequel trilogy off the ground, and thus hired Rian Johnson to write and direct Episode 8 and Colin Trevorrow to co-write and direct Episode 9. The idea being that each director would build on what the previous filmmaker had crafted, leading to a sort of creative handoff from one director to the next, i.e., as I said earlier, with the lightsaber handing over scene. In Johnson's case, that meant following certain threads that Abrams built, like Rey's confrontation with Luke Skywalker, and dropping others like Snoke. The Last Jedi was a critical success, but was divisive among some diehard fans, owing to some of these decisions to veer left when it looked like Abrams was plotting a course to the right. And again, you know, this is just because, you know, you got one person that wants to go one way, and one person that wants to go another way, and then one person that wants to go back the other way. So when Abrams signed on to take over Episode 9 after Trevorrow left the project, he had yet another unenviable task. And this is the thing, and even John Boyega said it 1,000 times. Look, J.J. Abrams did the best that he could do, okay? I have no doubt in my mind. He worked his arse off when he came back to try and make the best film he could possibly make. It was an impossible task. And I've said this before. Regardless of what you think of The Last Jedi, as a second act, it doesn't do what a second act is supposed to do. As a second act, you're supposed to leave the characters in uncertain positions, and I know some will say, yes, they are. Well, no, but it ends on hope and prosperity. It doesn't end like a second act. It doesn't set up the final villain properly. It makes the final villain more conflicted, and it kills the actual villain, so then they bring another villain to compensate for the other villain, and then it just becomes a big mess. So, back to the article. Another unenviable task, albeit a completely different one. He had to finish a story he started, but one that had taken some alternate routes in its middle chapter. Routes that Abrams wouldn't have necessarily gone down. The resulting film, The Rise of Skywalker, was similarly divisive, as Abrams brought the story back around to some ideas he had percolating while making The Force Awakens, specifically owing to Rey's parentage. Which we won't go into, if I'm being honest. Personally, I enjoyed the creative handoff between Abrams and Johnson. So this is just, this bit here, I think we can all agree. I like that The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi feel like distinct films, each following themes and threads that these two different filmmakers sparked to, but others blame this creative handoff for perceived problems of the sequel trilogy and claim that it would have been better had Abrams and or Lucasfilm planned out the three-movie arc from the very beginning. Yeah, that's facts. So when I spoke to Abrams recently for a press day celebrating the 10th anniversary of his film Super 8, I asked him about this creative handoff and how does he feel. So let's get into the quote. Let's see what our man JJ has to say. He says, I've been involved in a number of projects that have been, in most cases, series, that have ideas that begin the thing where you feel like you know where it's going to go. And sometimes an actor who comes in, other times it's a relationship that, as written, doesn't quite work, and things that you think are going to be so well received just crash and burn, and other things that you think like, oh, that's a small moment, or that's a one-episode character, suddenly become a hugely important part of the story. I feel like that part really applies to Star Wars. I feel like what I've learned as a lesson a few times now, and it's something that's especially in this pandemic year, working with writers has become clear. The lesson is that you have to plan things as best as you can, and you always need to be able to respond to the unexpected. And the unexpected can come in all sorts of forms, and I do think that there's something more important than knowing where you... There's nothing more important, than knowing where you're going. And obviously, because before I get into the second bit, I just want to just highlight on that. Yes, you need to know where you're going. Look, you can have your thoughts on the MCU. You can have your thoughts on whether there's a decline going with the MCU. But ultimately, you got to give credit where credit's due. Over 20 movies in, there is barely any inconsistencies there whatsoever. There's minor inconsistencies, sometimes timeline issues. But overall, I'd say the MCU gets it bang on. Alright, they get it bang on. You look at the sequel trilogy, which is just 3 films. It's all over the gaff. It's all over the gaff. And even the latest Bad Batch episode, not the latest one, the first Bad Batch episode, apparently it conflicts with a comic. I mean, I don't really read too many of the comics because to me, the visual experience, that is Star Wars. I hate the fact that I have to go and read books to fill in knowledge for the films. Like, it's like, no, make it make sense in the movie, please. Not external material. But let's get back to the article. But ultimately, the filmmaker said that he's learned the hard way, that it's better to have a plan and be willing or able to change it than not have one at all. You just never really know. But having a plan, I have learned, in some cases the hard way, is the most critical thing, because otherwise, you don't know what you're setting up. You don't know what to emphasize, because if you don't know the inevitable of the story, you're just as good as your last sequence, or effect, or joke, or whatever. But you want to be leading to something inevitable. That's true. That is very true. Very true. Not much to add to that little quote there, other than what I've already said. But yeah, it's... The thing is with this, guys, and I'm speaking to all my fans here, and I say this, is just because you have a plan, it doesn't always necessarily mean that it's going to be good, or that people will like it. But at least the consistency is there. This is why the prequels have become as in high regard as they have. Because, yes, they have their issues, they have their problems, the romance, the dialogue, the pacing, the awkward, creepy stares, all that stuff, the fart jokes. But ultimately, the story is consistent and it lines up with the other 3 movies in such a rich and organic way that it enhances the originals. The sequels, however, they don't enhance anything. They're good as their own thing, but I just feel like they're not really enhancing much. They just stand out on their own as their own kind of separate thing in some other separate timeline. It just doesn't mesh. And I've said this a million times. The reason the sequel trilogy failed isn't just because of a lack of plan, but all the factors. You know, Star Wars films used to release every 3 years. The sequel trilogy released every 2 years. And then it feels like as soon as Mickey Mouse bought the brand, it's like, okay, quick, we've got to release the first Star Wars film. We've got to get our money back. It's like, whoa, wait! Wait a minute! Take your time. Do it at the right moment. Because again, comment down below if I'm wrong in the comment section. There'll always be someone who does that, but anyway. It literally, as soon as they bought the brand from George Lucas, instantly, Phil. Instantly. Like, it didn't take them long at all. And yes, The Force Awakens to me was, you know, I don't fall into the category of it's exactly A New Hope, but it is a very safe retread of A New Hope, but I understand why they did it. Around that time, you would be hard-pressed to find anyone who actively supported the prequels. You know, obviously in recent years things have changed. You know, prequel fans like me have grown up and we now have a voice and we're able to defend those movies because, you know, we grew up with them. Which is the same thing I'm going to say now. That all the sequel fans that grow up with the sequels now, they will grow up in 10 years' time and defend the movies that they love. They'll go, oh, Ben Solo's my favourite, or Rey's my favourite, or Finn and Poe are my favourites. You know, they'll have that experience or whatever, and we can't take that away from them, okay? We cannot take that away from them. But ultimately, I feel like the problem here is it was just a case of, quick, get it out. Rather than taking time to think, right, what story are we telling? And as much as I love the MCU, and I'm happy to see it continue, that rhymed, I would much rather have something like the Dark Knight trilogy. Because at least it's straight to the point, it's consistent, and the 3 movies tell a story. Okay, and that's not me throwing the MCU under the bus, I'm a big MCU fan. But it's just an example of, you know, quality over quantity. You know, and it's great that we're getting all these new shows and stuff for Star Wars. But let's be real, the only one that I'm really going to be losing my mind over is the Kenobi show. Mostly because of Hayden and Ewan. I have been dying to see these two back into the fold since Disney got the brand. You know, where have these two been the entire sequel trilogy? Where were they? Where were they? And that is another problem in itself. I don't believe at the end of Return of the Jedi, Anakin would have left his own son to his own devices. I don't believe Obi-Wan would have left Luke to his own devices. I don't believe it. I don't buy it. I don't believe it. Now, I want to end this sort of video here by saying, you know, if you guys want me to do more of these videos in future, then, you know, I'm absolutely down for doing that. But please understand this. I like the sequels more than I dislike them. I can watch those movies. There's a lot of things I like about the sequels as a whole. You know, Ben Solo is literally my favorite character from the whole thing. I think Finn had the most potential, but, you know, it ultimately went nowhere. Rey is likable, but, you know, just can't really root for her too much. Poe, I feel like they gave him a bit more towards the end, but I felt like, you know, they could have done more with him. I'd say Chewie was probably the only character that really got served much justice throughout this trilogy, out of all the legacy characters, if I'm being completely honest. But again, you know, the sequels, they are what they are, they're done. But I think what we can see from these comments is that, you know, JJ is also, I suppose, fully aware that, you know, a plan is what helps the process. Why would you want to write for arguably the biggest franchise in cinematic history on set? Like, I'm pretty sure that was some of the stories, that they were writing this movie on set because they had to literally, you know, go bump, 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 you know, just to keep up. And that's why the movie feels like bump, 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 bump. Because it's that was moving at a click. Like, the Rise of Skywalker is like 3 movies in one. You know, it literally shoves it all in. And if they had a plan, maybe Palpatine's return could have been done better. But ultimately, you know, I fell into the hype. When Palpatine was laughing at the end of the trailer, I lost it. But that's because I thought, oh my god, Anakin's going to be in the fold. You know, Obi-Wan's going to be in the fold. This is going to be a battle of the gods. And it just didn't play out like that. You know, it just, I guess you could say my expectations were subverted. And I was a little bit disappointed, you know. It is a shame. I mean, the kids who grow up with these movies, they're not going to know anything different. And this is their Star Wars, you know. So in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, they will grow up and defend these movies. It's just a shame that we got here. Given everything that we've really, you know, that the Star Wars franchise has to offer. And I'm going to end the video with this. The sequel trilogy can be used as an indication of what works and what doesn't. And we know what works and we know what doesn't in regards to Star Wars. So let's just keep it that way. The Mandalorian is thriving. You know, I have no doubt Filoni's going to work his magic and enhance the sequels. You may not like the sequels, but I'm sure Filoni is going to do something with his shows to enhance the sequels the same way the Clone Wars show did for the prequels and enhance that area and that lore. So guys and girls, leave your comments down below. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. This is probably the first time I've done something like this. And I usually do quite a lot of Cobra Kai and Fast and Furious content. But I wanted to, you know, sort of beef up my Star Wars fan base a little bit. Get some more Star Wars fans up on in here. And, you know, I dubbed myself the Chosen One. And the Chosen One will bring balance to the fandom. So, hopefully, this doesn't backfire all in my face. Anyway, guys and girls, jump in the comments section down below. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. And remember, the Force will be with you always.